holler out at the nurses and the pharmacists. I mean, they are the true heroes in this situation, aren't they? Doctor, are you really sure you want to? No, I'm actually not sure. Please give me back the drug chart. like oh my goodness, I want to sing that from the rooftops. And I think, but it is true, it is a team sport. And I feel like maybe the issue is that we probably weren't taught that at med school, or that wasn't the culture. And I think what you're doing, Beck, in this conversation is bringing that back to the top of our minds and giving us permission to be human, and allow other people to catch us in our humanity.
Hello, my beautiful friends. My name is Dr. Becc.
And I am Kristeen Barker, and this is Am I Doing It Wrong? A podcast for doctors by doctors. Dr. Becc is a mindset coach and medical doctor who specialises in liberating driven, professional women from the limitations of perfectionism, imposter syndrome, and people pleasing. She's basically the cheat code for getting out of your own way, showing up authentically, and living a life you're proud of.
And Kristeen is a medical educator and nephrologist who creates resources for doctors in training that I truly think are an unfair advantage. She makes complex topics super simple and takes the pain and uncertainty out of passing your medical exams. Kristeen and I connected a few years ago via our online platforms, and over the years we've discussed countless highs, lows, and in-betweens of doctor life. And in doing so, we've experienced firsthand the power of vulnerable conversations to show us where we're getting in our own way and underestimating our capacity.
So we want you to be part of the conversation and experience these same results. Every week on the pod, we'll be bringing you conversations which shine light in dark places, normalise the doctor journey, ease unnecessary suffering, and give you actionable steps to thrive in all facets of your life. So grab a cuppa and get cozy for this week's episode of Am I Doing It Wrong? The podcast for doctors by doctors. Welcome to another ep of the poddy. We are so excited to bring you today's episode. I guess we titled this You Don't Get to Be Perfect as a Doctor, and this was inspired by a recent experience that you had, Beck, and I just think it's a fascinating concept to discuss today. So can you tell us where the inspiration came from for the topic idea?
I have the privilege of co-hosting these peer support meetings for doctors and medical students. So these are internationally open meetings where we get together on Zoom, and it's just a bunch of doctors talking about the highs and lows and everything in between of being a doctor. It's kind of a crazy job when you really think about it. It's very normalized to us, isn't it? We've kind of been moved through medical school, and then we just naturally go on to work in hospitals or in the clinics or wherever you work as a doctor. But actually, when you sit down and talk with a bunch of other doctors in a very open, non-judgmental space, you're like, wow, this job's actually pretty hard, pretty amazing, and also pretty weird for a human to dedicate their life to. So these meetings are so wholesome, and it's so grounding for me also always to hear the stories from other people's lives. There was something that one of the attendees said that has stuck with me, and it felt like it captured so well the core things that has us hold our grip onto perfectionism as doctors. Why so many doctors are perfectionistic, and it's not just because we like to do things well. It's not just because we like to cross the T's and dot the I's. It's not just because we get our sense of self-worth on being excellent, because lots of doctors have, by definition, been awarded and celebrated throughout their educational life for being excellent. It's not just about the wonderful side of being perfect, but the reason that so many doctors don't want to let go of their perfectionism, even if it causes them so many mental, emotional, and physical problems. I saw that tail walking across the screen. Hi, Latte.
Latte has hijacked the podcast yet again. Come and say hi. Now you've hijacked. Beck's on a roll.
Hi, Latte. Despite the mental, emotional, and physical negative effects of perfectionism, we hold on to it because we know that when we're not perfect, patients are hurt or harmed, and some patients even die. And this person they put their hand up in the meeting and they said it somewhat out of nowhere. It felt like it was a question that had been sort of burning on their heart for a while. They said, I understand intellectually, and I hear everybody say it. I know that we can't be perfectionistic as doctors. We shouldn't be perfectionistic. But what do we do? How do we allow that? How do we let go of being perfectionistic when not being perfect means patients get harmed? And there was a beautiful conversation that then floated around the room where people shared the times that they hadn't been perfect, and people pointed out the suffering that is created by trying to be perfect from the doctor as the individual, and also how that can harm our performance, that when we try to be perfect and then we're overly vigilant and anxious, then that actually harms our performance. All of these really important points came up with all these intelligent and experienced people. But what didn't come up was what I think is critical for us to start to let go of our perfectionism, which is the blatant truth that we as doctors will likely make mistakes that do harm patients. And I know that that might make so many people recoil. You want to prick your hands in your ears and unhear that, or try and rewind the tape and hide from that idea. And if that's you right now, that's okay. But I also want to be somebody standing right here in front of you saying that doctors make mistakes all the time. We don't get to do this job and never make a mistake. To hide from that possibility that we will make a mistake, I think is going to be one of the most harmful things that we can do for ourselves in our careers. That can either lead to the dysfunction and the sickness, the suffering that comes from trying to be perfect robotic humans that we're not. And also by brilliant people leaving this profession when they realize that they can never be perfect, no matter how hard they work, no matter how experienced they get, or regrettably, when they make a mistake and they make that not okay. They make it mean something about them as a doctor. So while not many people are talking about this, we feel it's our duty, this space on the podcast that we're so grateful to have, to connect with so many people like you who want to bring more of your humanity back into your work. You want to be more of a human in your work. That's why you hear this podcast with us. It's not because we're not here projecting some perfect image of how doctors should or can be. That's obviously not exactly our style, but you're here because you know that there's a lot more to us as humans, and that also includes the doctor humans as well. We will piece this out a little bit more, but I think it's really important to say to start the most common objection, which is this idea that if we stop striving for perfect, or if we say that, if we face the reality that doctors do make mistakes that harm patients, that's the same thing as saying that we're condoning these mistakes happening, that we're in some way okay with these mistakes happening. But instead, what we're trying to do here is not fight with reality, not deny the reality that humans are imperfect and we don't get to be perfect, doctors included. It doesn't mean that we stop striving.
And I think that is a really profound, there's the whole concept of this is profound for anyone who's working in clinical practice right now, who has ever worked in clinical practice. We will all have examples of times where we personally have been right at the cusp of causing harm and saved by the Swiss cheese model, or have actually caused harm. And then you're left with this like what you described as an isolated experience, because you actually think, even though like what you're saying is you've just been in a room of amazing people who are so vulnerable to share their experiences and acknowledge the complexity of this conversation. But when it happens to you, you feel like you're the only person on planet Earth this has ever happened to. And that concept of feeling so isolated is in and of itself a bit of a problem, and it's created by the culture around us. But I think also what you're saying is we're not sitting here saying we're aiming for mediocrity. No one who goes to med school and becomes a doctor, well, I don't say no one, but no one, most people would who go to med school become a doctor and get out the other side of it. There's nothing average about you. Mediocrity is not really in your makeup. Like, that's just not who you are. And we're not aiming for that when we're at the bedside and doing what we do in clinical practice. We're striving for excellence at all times. But I think even though you're striving for excellence, it's just a statistical thing with every single procedure. There is a percentage complication rate. By even the most experienced proceduralist, there's still going to be a percentage of things that go wrong. And as we walk around the hospital, there is, you know, a percentage of things that can go wrong. So I'm interested in your thoughts, Becc, on the wider systemic factors that impact this concept of perfectionism in medicine. So I guess the expectation of perfectionism, or maybe the thing that leads to that isolation. Could you speak to that?
There are so many different contributing factors here. And the one that I just like to zoom in on one right now for this podcast and just I just want you guys to open your mind to this idea that you probably never questioned before. And just, you don't need to do anything about it today. Just let it come into your awareness, come into your mind, and just let it bounce around for the next couple of days and see where you land personally in your integrity. For most of us, for many of us, we came into medicine because we care about people and we want to help people. It's kind of the driver. And there are so many other careers that you could do that have all the prestige and the flexibility and the leadership opportunities, whatever. There are so many other careers you could do that don't involve directly caring for people and being responsible for people's health and happiness in so many ways. So if we have come into medicine because we care about people, to then ask this cohort of people to accept that we will harm patients as a result of not being perfect, I think that's very difficult for us to accept. So this is the idea that I want you to just let rest in your mind for the next week and see where you end up landing. Not in any quick way, but just take your time. There's no rush to land on what you think about this. Because as long as it's unacceptable for you as a doctor to ever harm a patient, you will remain a perfectionist. And I'm not using the word perfectionist in a complimentary way here. I'm talking about a person who is rigid and inflexible, who has not got the ability to reshuffle priorities and be dynamic in the moment, a person who lives in the sympathetic nervous system state because they constantly need to be hypervigilant. I'm talking about somebody who suffers with all of the negative effects of perfectionism, which, by the way, don't in large part improve your performance anyway. So if we want to begin, and in a way this is a systemic problem because it's not just us as an individual that holds this expectation for us to be perfect. It's also systemic in the way that we do recognize our society expects that as doctors, or expects that of doctors. For most people, and I'm sure you've heard this yourself, I hear it all the time, the patient will say that a doctor wasn't very good, or even they were terrible or incompetent because they, quote, didn't even know the diagnosis, couldn't even get the diagnosis, picked the wrong treatment, and so on. There's this lack of tolerance for doctors not being precise and exact and all-knowing. So it's not just in our heads. It's not just these that we've decided in ourselves that we want to be perfect. There's also these layers and layers and layers of punishments and rewards from both within the hospital and even spreading well and truly out of the hospital into society. But for me, again, just coming back to that focus today of it being unacceptable for a doctor to cause harm to a patient, as much as it might make you recoil and shut off this podcast right now, if you feel some kind of connection to this concept, as much as it makes you uncomfortable, I want you to try and stay with this discomfort. It makes me uncomfortable still talking about it myself. It's not something that comes easily to me either. But to me, I feel that it's something that is necessary, not just for me to be able to keep functioning in medicine, but I think it's necessary for all of medicine to keep functioning full stop. There was a TED talk I was listening to by, let me see, Timothy McDonald. He's a Harvard-trained anesthesiologist, pediatrician, and licensed attorney. So not only is he a clinician, but he's also somebody who works on the thing that completely tears clinicians down. It's career-breaking things for us, which is the medico-legal side of things, often attached to an adverse patient effect that can be so devastating for clinicians to go through. Not only do you have the devastation of having a patient with an adverse effect, but now you also have the chaos and the fear and the condemnation from our legal system as well in this situation. So in a very interesting position, but I got less than a minute into his talk and I rewinded it a couple of times just to double check these numbers. He cited a NEJM study, a New England Journal of Medicine study, that estimated that in the next hour, I'm assuming this is an American population, but in the next hour, there will be 70 instances of severe patient harm or death related to medical error, or 600,000 incidences over the next year. So all of this to say, I know that we all want to make it unacceptable to make a mistake that causes harm. And if we're doing that, we're putting our head in the sand, which would be fine if it didn't cause us other problems, other negative effects, which ultimately also harm our patients too.
I mean, there's so much in what you said there, but I guess what comes up for me immediately is that I guess it would be the ideal to cause no harm ever, right? So although statistically speaking, and I've just said that there is, like with every procedure, there's a percentage harm. And then what you're saying on top of that, there could be other medical errors, wrong medication given, whatever it is. There's all this other stuff that is happening around us. But equally, like I feel like people who are in hospital or, you know, even in the community, there are mechanisms to protect them. There is a hospital system around us as doctors and around all of the healthcare team. There are systems and checks in place because previous medical mishaps happened, and we changed the system based on those mishaps. And that's what we should be doing is changing that system to reduce the amount of errors, because there's often more than one person. There is often that Swiss cheese model that has gone awry. But I think thinking about the aviation industry, they would be the first, I think, the leaders in this space. And I often wonder why medicine's not as, I guess, advanced as the aviation industry, because they seem to adapt to the human error is something that they wholeheartedly acknowledge and embrace, and they change the systems to the extreme to overcome these natural human errors. And then over here in medicine, we still have these systems which, what you're basically saying is we can't expect perfectionism from ourselves, because perfection does not exist, and we are human beings, and we're also working in a system. And although the system has checks in place to try and prevent medical mishaps, there are lots of things about that system that actually create the perfect scenario for a medical mishap. And yet, we as the clinician, if we are coming at this from a place where we are holding ourselves wholeheartedly responsible, and I think as doctors we do that. We feel like we're leading the team, that it was our signature on the medication, that it was our plan, it was, the rest of the allied health team and the nursing staff are just executing on our plan or whatever it is, and we do feel ultimately responsible for our patients. And I think whilst that is kind of a beautiful thing and it has a place, and it kind of is true in some level, I think that that's what you're trying to speak to is it's not fair. It's not fair to expect perfectionism of yourself. It's not fair to expect perfectionism of yourself within a system that is not necessarily adapting at the level that would be warranted to actually prevent maximally these medical mishaps. It's not like the aviation industry, right? There's still rosters with lots of sleep deprivation in them and bits and bobs. We could go on forever. And I never want to sit on this podcast and bag the system, because I feel like we are making progress, and I don't think that attacking the system is necessarily helpful. But I think in this scenario, it is very important to at least acknowledge the system as it pertains to our own perfectionism and our own level of responsibility as we walk around the wards.
I couldn't agree more. And I'd really like to just narrow in and probably end on that point, that the solution to this isn't that you just sit back and, as we were saying, there's that common misunderstanding of letting go of perfectionism, that you would sit back and relax and stop being vigilant, because what's the point anyway? Because you can't be perfect. That's not the point. The point is recognizing that you're not the individual here, as you're saying. You're the individual working in a system by very specific design. And it's not just because you can't work for 24 hours. That's not the only reason that you're not the one and only doctor taking care of that patient, is it? You have a team of doctors around you for multiple reasons, but one of them is doctors, nurses, allied health, so many different people around you. You have a team also for your clinical decisions, not just logistically, not just because different people do different jobs and roles, but also because then your decision is cited not just by you, the one flawed, yes, brilliant, intelligent, experienced, expert person that you are, but the system knows that you will make mistakes. And so having a second pair of eyes that your clinical decisions are run through, that is the Swiss cheese model. And that is how our system was always meant to be designed. We never assumed that a doctor's decisions would always be perfect. And the idea that that makes them less competent is ridiculous. It's very simply explained by how the brain works. You don't take in complete, perfect information. Your brain doesn't work without bias. Your brain functions fundamentally with bias. And then just with even those two pieces, you're taking in partial information and your brain isn't this beautiful, logical, robotic, scientific machine, you will make mistakes. And thank goodness we are so lucky to get to work with colleagues, whether they're within our profession or whether they're our nursing team and our pharmacists and our allied health team. Goodness gracious, I've been saved by pharmacists so many times in my day. And, actually on my last placement, I thanked my intern so many times. So thanks for picking that up. I really appreciate that. And I no longer make that mean anything about me. And yeah, I get that initial like, oh, that could have harmed the patient. I still get that grab in my chest. I feel it right now. It's so familiar. I still get it, but it doesn't spiral to me anymore, or not as much anymore as when I believed that the imperfect actions and decisions that I made were some kind of show of my incompetence and the fact that I shouldn't be here. It's not complacency. It is recognizing my humanity. And if I make a mistake now, my overwhelming reaction is gratitude for the brilliant team that I have around me. And we all deserve a brilliant team around us as a part of this difficult job we do. And that's that sweet Swiss cheese model that you keep referring to. That's critical to medicine.
I think that's so beautiful, Becc. But I think one of the most beautiful gifts I think that will come from this conversation, and you having raised that, is that when people have this top of mind, they can then welcome in that team environment, like make medicine a team sport and invite in the opinions of others and not feel like it's all on your shoulders. Welcome that and make people feel safe expressing themselves and gathering their ideas. And just to really holler out at the nurses and the pharmacists. I mean, they are the true heroes in this situation, aren't they? Doctor, are you really sure you want to? No, I'm actually not sure. Please give me back the drug chart. like, oh my goodness, I want to sing that from the rooftops. And I think, but it is true. It is a team sport. And I feel like maybe the issue is that we probably weren't taught that at med school, or that wasn't the culture. And I think what you're doing, Becc, in this conversation is bringing that back to the top of our minds and giving us permission to be human and allow other people to catch us in our humanity, like what you're saying.
Absolutely. It was such an important conversation. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Permission to be a human. Good luck on your attempts to be anything other than human. We'll continue to watch with amusement and compassion.
With Dr. Humans. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.
Bye, Dr. Humans.